On behalf of the Sustainability Reporting Standards Board of ICAI, I Jyoti Singh extend a warm welcome to all of you for the inaugural session of our webinar. Today's session is centered around the critical theme supply chain decarbonization. We are honored to have with us our esteemed speaker, Ms. Ashwinova Goshalji, our moderator for today, CA Manisha Jigar Mangeji, and CA Het Bhedaji. Let us now begin. I would like to invite CA Het Bhedaji to kindly take the session forward.
Yeah, thank you for giving me this opportunity, and I will start with the Ashwinova's profile. So, she's a sustainability expert with 8+ years of experience in management consulting, specializes in product and supply chain decarbonization with a strong focus on Scope 3 emissions and net zero strategy development. Expertise includes carbon accounting, target setting, decarbonization pathway design, and scenario analysis. She is also experienced in delivering projects on net zero strategy, emission reduction opportunity, materiality assessment, and non financial disclosures. She has contributed to the development and implementations of leading decarbonization platforms, including Catalyst Zero by McKinsey, Supply Chain Decarb Suite by Accenture, and Watershed, among others. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Ashwini, ma'am,
Yes.
please go ahead.
Yes. Thank you all. And first of all, thank you, ICI, for giving me this opportunity to interact with the esteemed professionals of our country. And it's a delight to be here today on a winter morning. Hope everybody is back from Christmas mood, and we can have some interactions today to discuss the topics with regard to sustainability and then have a deep dive into decarbonization. A quick check. Will there be chat option for the audience, or will somebody be relaying the questions to me if there are any? Because if while sharing screen, I might not be able to look at the continuously look at the chat.
Yes, ma'am. I would be just having that option. So at the end, what we will have a 10 to 15 minutes question answer session. There, I would read the questions and you can just brief about the questions related to the subject. So during the session, you might get into the flow and continue, please.
Okay, that's good to know.
Thank you.
Great. So I already have, I mean, Heth has given a very extensive introduction for me, so I'll not get into any further introduction, just that I am, I'll just give context of how I came into the field of sustainability and how I would relate myself to SRSB. So, yes, I have studied sustainability in academia and then worked with EY, which was my first employer that introduced me to the world of corporate sustainability. And then I used to conduct a lot of sustainability assurance where I realized that in India, we are all, all the companies are doing sustainability only out of regulations and, of course, some bit of foreign investor demand, but there is no other force, and rightly so, because we are a growing economy and sustainability is what we call, what I would say, luxury in today's date. And also when we talk about sustainability, and if companies want to go through, like, grow with uh, the path of sustainability, they need to shed a lot of capital. Needless to say that there's a lot of capital requirement, and our country is not yet the country that is still trying to fulfill the needs of most of the people in the growing phase cannot kind of afford to have sustainability as a prime focus. Having said that, I would say India is at an advantage when it comes to sustainability because, in kind of sustainable thinking and sustainable designing, because while working with global clients, so I have worked with global clients during my stint with McKinsey, where I served European clients and Southeast Asian clients. And now I am currently employed with Accenture Strategy and I am serving the market of US. So the vast difference that I see is that, of course, those countries are all developed. They have enough capital to think about sustainability. Though, of course, we know the situation now with the US. They are not focusing on sustainability at all. But still, there are some elements that they can afford to if they want, but India cannot. However, if we want to kind of choose the path of sustainability, I would say India is at much more advantageous position than any of the Western countries. The reason being, most of our manufacturing units. So we all know that most of the emissions are coming from energy and industry sectors and the buildings. So we are still in the building phase, right? So if we kind of incorporate sustainability in our designs and planning, then the amount that we have to spend on getting onto a sustainability track is much lesser than any of the Western countries who already have a lot of capital goods built, and they kind of, if they need to transform, then the money that they need to shed is a lot more, right? So I would say India is at a much advantageous position that way. Now, with that note, let us kick off the session for the day. I'll try and share my screen. Please let me know once that's visible. You see it? Can somebody confirm if you can see my slides? I cannot hear. Technical team, Heth, Manisha, can you please confirm?
It is visible, ma'am, but can you start from the slideshow, from the beginning slide?
I am on slide number 1 only.
Ma'am, can you please make it full screen?
Yes, I can. Okay. Right. So,
Yes, it is fine, ma'am.
thank you. So, the topic for the day is, of course, supply chain decarbonization. So, we will talk about decarbonization at length and how a decarbonization strategy is built for firms and what are the things that they need to think about and prioritize while developing a strategy on decarbonization. And then we'll see some of the leading firms globally, how they have engaged with their suppliers in terms of sustainable goals. But before we step into decarbonization, I would want to take a step back and first talk about supply chain sustainability. Now, what is supply chain sustainability? We all know sustainability is nothing but looking at the holistic approach of a company's transformation or engagement in aspects of environment, that is, be it water intake, energy usage, resource consumption, and then, of course, when there is energy consumption, then there is also emissions. So emissions or the waste that they generate. So taking care of all these environmental aspects and their impact on the environment. Then also the social aspects where we talk about human rights, labor laws, companies' grievance redressal mechanism, and then the G is the governance, which is the main section that kind of looks after both the E and S aspects. So that is sustainability. Now, when this sustainability is with respect to the supply chain of a firm, that is our supply chain sustainability. And why a company needs to focus on supply chain sustainability is because of two reasons. One, it is for it is easier to manage your internal sustainability aspects, that is anything that is governed within the boundaries of a company, boundaries in terms of financial or reporting boundaries. So it is within the reach and control of the company, and it's easier to manage. So that is a good point. And of course, companies need to work on that first before they kind of try and manage their supply chain. Then the second, so that is one part of it. And then there's supply chain aspect, which is a much more complex problem to solve for, because of course it's outside the control of the company, and they can only influence the supply chain indirectly. So that is a reason why once they have tackled the internal issues, they should immediately start focusing on supply chain, because that is a much more longer term agenda that they need to work on. And also the impact that supply chain has, the supply chain sustainability, the negative impact that it can have is between 70 to 90%, depending on which industry the company belongs to. Hence, supply chain sustainability is like one of the prime requirements. And of course, now that we have moved, we are moving away from regulatory binded to core ESG uh, strategy within the firm, we must look at supply chain sustainability. And that is why it is no longer optional, right? Now, talking about what are the aspects included in this supply chain sustainability, it starts right from the design phase of a company's manufacturing or service delivery. So whenever a company is thinking about the planning phase, they can incorporate some eco designs. So that is where it should start from. Then would come the sourcing of raw materials or services or any of the purchase goods. So that is the part of sourcing. And sourcing mainly looks after, when we talk about sourcing, then from a supply chain of sustainability aspect, we will talk about responsible sourcing. And what is responsible sourcing? It is nothing but who we take it from. So where do we source from? What are the things that we are sourcing? That is what is forming the main part of the sourcing aspect. Then comes, of course, logistics and warehousing, where and so logistics have a dual role, right? Upstream as well as downstream. So I'm talking about the upstream logistics now. So once they are sourcing from somewhere, how they are sourcing it, like what is the mode of transport, how they are storing it, whether they are making sure that the suppliers are kind of having good ESG practices, and they are having, and even the logistics, if they are kind of making use of optimized routes or not. So that is part of the logistics. Then finally comes the manufacturing is something that we talked about, the first thing, and that is also part of the value chain. Manufacturing is internal and can be controlled. I'm not saying it's easy to do it or it is um, cost effective, but it is definitely, from a controls point of view, it is easier to manage. So that then comes the manufacturing, where we can kind of decide on what kind of energy is being used, how the production losses are being managed, how the company can minimize waste production or waste generation, and then how they can kind of do some material recovery. So that is all part of material recovery, as in production material that is being wasted, that how they can recover and reuse in the process. So these are all part of the manufacturing phase. Again comes downstream logistics and distribution, where efficient transportation and timely transportation can reduce the environmental impact. And then comes the use phase where the customers are using it. So basically durability of the product. And if a product is durable, of course it will have the impact the product has, the environmental impact. If it lasts for, if a product is being used for 5 years, then it will have more impact than a product being used for 10 years, because we kind of then can distribute the impact over 10 years. So durability is something that matters. And then of course the emissions that it has while being used also matters. For example, let's take car, any car for example. So there is of course a manufacturing, sourcing and all the procurement impact of those, a car. But a car's usage during the use phase while it is with the customers also has a great impact on the environment, because of the refueling we are doing, because of all the maintenance work. So from that point of view, if we are switching to EV, when I say it's, I'm talking about green electricity. If we focused on more on renewable energy, then during the use phase, we can reduce the emission when compared to petrol or diesel usage, right? So that is something that the companies can, and it will be incorporated right in the design and manufacturing phase, right? So because a customer cannot control whether it will be petrol or diesel, it will be the company who is designing the car making that decision. So use phase is also something that the companies need to look into. And then finally comes, sorry, it's not there on the slide, but finally is the end of life, where there's a disposal. So end of life has two things. One is, of course, how it is being disposed, where it is being disposed, whether each part can be dismantled. I'm giving an example of car, right? So if each part can be dismantled and something that can be reused can again be sent back to the manufacturer, extracted, maybe some metals are extracted, the battery, etc. But if it has to be at all disposed of, what is the treatment it is receiving, whether it's environmentally safe to dispose it in a particular way. So there are many standards with respect to that. Globally, we have EPA standards for that in the US, that is being followed widely across the globe. So again, we have the end of life phase. So all these phases together from the supply chain or value chain. So when we say supply chain, it is at times we usually get confused with the sourcing and procurement part. So supply chain is not restricted to sourcing and procurement slash logistics. It entails the entire cradle to grave uh, approach of a product or manufacturing process. So with that, I guess I have been able to explain a bit about what is supply chain and why it matters, supply chain sustainability. Now, moving on, we will just discuss some of the key drivers globally that is governing the why are companies, of course, they should ethically do it, but that is not what companies work for. They are not, I mean, ethics is, I shouldn't say it, but ethics is something that takes a little, that comes later and plays a role a little later once the companies have uh, addressed all the major challenges that they have at hand. And one of the major, like few of the major drivers that drive sustainability today are, in India, of course, it's BRSR. And but then we need to look at the global scenario. I'll come to that a little later, why we should look at the global scenario. But then there are regulations like CS triple D, then UDR. CS triple D is a regulation on corporate sustainability due diligence, which is being done for human rights and all the social aspects. Then there is EUDR. So any company that basically uses any raw material with that comes from plants, be it textile, be it any agri product or rubber or these kind of, or wood furniture. These companies who are using these as raw materials need to abide by EUDR, where it is a traceability requirement, where they need to trace back to the actual farmland or forest land where this is being sourced from, and they need to make sure that that land is not being deforested. So this is European Union's deforestation regulation. And that is what I was coming to. Why it matters to India today. It is because many of the companies in Europe who are working uh, like to source these raw materials are having their so India as their sourcing country. So they may not even buy directly from India. They have a middleman, a middle company who's kind of importing the materials from India, be it coffee, be it any other thing, spices. They are exporting it from India to Europe, importing it from India to Europe, and then they are selling to companies like, let's say, Hershey or Pirelli, like the tire company, or Hershey, like the chocolate company, Mondelez. So then, of course, Hershey, Mondelez, even if they are US-based companies, they have very big manufacturing units in Europe, right? So they need to kind of abide by these rules. And then for them to abide by it, the Indian companies that they are sourcing from need to abide with these laws, at least not abide by these laws, but at least be ready for the assurance that those companies are conducting or will be conducting, and be prepared to kind of support with the required evidence. So that is EUDR. Then we have CBAM, which is the carbon border adjustment mechanism, right? That, I mean, if we are aware that nowadays, suppose from India, Tata Steel is a supplier of BMW, then BMW would have to, uh, if they are taking it from Tata Steel, there is a cost that they have to pay if there is a marginal difference in the carbon emissions that exist, because they are sourcing from from a carbon intensive country, where they not carbon intensive country, but a manufacturing process which is more carbon intensive. Hence they would want to, let's say, switch to low carbon steel. BMW, if BMW wants to switch to low carbon steel, then somebody like Tata Steel or JSW Steel, they are bound to manufacture low carbon steel, right? So that is how the in the supply chain, India is very much affected with these regulations. Then comes the capital market. You all understand capital market much better than me, so I wouldn't spend a lot of time in explaining that. But of course, as we can see that there are like more than, I mean, not more than, but approximately 3 trillion uh, USD assets under management, with regard like ESG assets, that investors are looking into nowadays. So you can understand that how much of investment is happening in the space of ESG, and to to take advantage of that capital, even a Indian company has to kind of abide by all the supply chain sustainability related laws and regulations, and need to incorporate that in their business practices. Then, of course, there's customer pressure, where OEMs, as I just explained, would be demanding supply chain transparency, and uh, they would request their suppliers, or rather push their suppliers to switch to sustainable practices, and set measurable targets to reduce the emissions that they are having there. And of course, if we talk about B2C, there is also a preference where customers are nowadays willing to pay a premium for a product that is more sustainable, eco-friendly, etc. Right? So there is definitely a customer pressure playing in there. And when it comes to talent and brands for employee attraction, again, sustainability plays a role. Recently, I read somewhere that in Europe, 3 out of 5 uh, employees are have in a survey, they have said that they want to work for a only work for a firm that has very strong sustainable goals, and they are already walking on the path of sustainability. So for the brand reputation as well as employee attraction, sustainability can play a key role. Now, with that, as we have understood, hopefully, the importance of supply chain sustainability, we'll see what are the aspects or pillars of supply chain sustainability. So, one, of course, is responsible sourcing, where we talk about human rights, labor standards. We have been talking about that for a while now, and it is absolutely important to make sure that the suppliers that a company engages with uh, have proper safety standards, labor standards in place. So for that, there are these ESG risk assessments and audits that are conducted. And of course, there is an aspect of emission also in that ESG risk assessment. So that is about our responsible sourcing. Then comes decarbonization. We'll be deep diving into this particularly today in a while. So I'll talk about energy transition, low carbon materials, and net zero there. So that is the next one. Then comes our fleet optimization and logistics. So I would say fleet optimization and logistics is also can also be housed under decarbonization, because when we say fleet optimization and logistics and talk about modal shift or EV or alternative fuels, even smart warehousing and energy efficiency, it's all part of decarbonization. Of course, fleet optimization has other aspects also, like route optimization or network redesign, which might not play a direct role under decarbonization. But then let's see, we'll touch upon fleet optimization as well if we have time. Then there is circularity. Circularity is, I mean, the name already suggests that it stands for having a circular approach where the design of a product should be such that at the end of its life it can be reused, recycled, and or there can be some sort of material recovery so that the efficiency of the material is enhanced. Like for example, I gave example of a car, right? That a car, if where should be, I mean, it should be dismantled, and some of the parts should be recycled for new car production, or some of the parts can be actually reused. So in the market now, I'm not sure if how many of you are aware of this, but there is something called secondary car market, which is not second hand. It's different from second hand market. It is secondary, which means that if when a car is being disposed of, let's say Tata Motors ka ek car is being um, disposed after 15 years, they'll take back the car, they'll see which parts can be maybe repaired and reused, not recycled. So they'll use that part, they'll repair it and use intact that part again in a car. So like that, the cars that have some or at least some part of reused materials, those are called secondary. Those cars are sold in secondary market, of course at a lesser price. Then some parts are not used as it is, or cannot be repaired, but the materials from that are extracted and recycled. For example, it's easier for Tata Motors to do it, because if they have to extract some of the materials, they have their own chain, and let's say it's about steel, it will go back to the steel plant, Tata Steel plant. So like that, they can have their own circular process in there. And then of course there are some parts which cannot be at all used; those are scrapped. Then we also have the waste to value, which is exactly the same thing that we just discussed, that these closed loop models, that one part when being disposed is again sent back to the first sourcing or manufacturing or design phase, then it is all circular. So that is one part. And lastly, there's traceability. Traceability is something that existed even before, where customers or your investors demanded to have end-to-end visibility of how you are sourcing, what you are doing uh, while you are sourcing, like what are the assessments you have in place for supplier selection, and then how would you how do you kind of manage your inventory, whether it's efficient enough, then manufacturing, and then end of use. So this traceability existed, but nowadays it is more of a having a digital traceability. So there are concepts like DPP, which is digital product passport, where a product, let's say, I mean, Audi, BMW, they are all doing this pilot product, even Ford. So what they are trying to do is, suppose there's a battery being used in a car, they would actually trace it back to where each of the raw materials, minerals, or metals were mined from. So, so if there is a 2 kg weight worth part or product, that would have each element by bomb traced to its origin. So that is like the digital product passport of that battery. So like that, there is everything, like even the UDR that I was talking about, the deforestation regulation. Uh, the companies are supposed to submit a file of that traceability report to their European Union government. But how would they do that? It's nothing but a digital tracking system where companies are kind of tracing everything back to the farm and having the geolocation of each farm. So there's a batch of production. Suppose there's a batch of chocolate. The cocoa of that chocolate batch has to be traced back to the original farm. The farm may lie in Thailand, Brazil, anywhere. Or if there's a coffee involved, then coffee can come from India. But the exact farm location, suppose it's some hill in Kerala. I'm just giving example. So it will have the geolocation attached with the declaration from the supplier that there is nothing involved and all the audits that have been conducted. So that entire documentation has to be submitted to the government. So that is also part of traceability mechanism. So that also is a very critical part of sustainable supply chain. Now, with that, I'll want to move on to for the actual session today where we deep dive on decarbonization strategy. Now, what is decarbonization strategy? We all know, I mean, I have put this slide up just for people to read, but right now I'll briefly explain what decarbonization looks like. But for that, we need to first understand what are carbon emissions or greenhouse gas emissions. So these two terms are used interchangeably. I can explain why they are used interchangeably as well. So greenhouse gas emissions, I mean, textbookish language is, of course, quite deeper, but it is nothing but the emissions that are generated whenever there is any source of form of energy being used for production. So there is this emission, be it to generate electricity we are burning coal, be it for any of the boilers in the plants we are using coal, or for running the vehicle we are using petroleum, diesel. So that is any source of energy, if they are not renewable, will kind of create some sort of emissions. Then that will be accounted as our greenhouse gas emission. Then there is another way of having a gas emissions are refrigerant leakage. Suppose there is any leakage, then from that also there can be some sort of emissions, which are then called leakage emissions from refrigerants. Then lastly, there can be some process emissions. So while in the manufacturing process, there can be some sort of emissions coming out and as a byproduct, and that would also be treated as greenhouse gas emission. So these are mainly the sources of greenhouse gas emission. And greenhouse gas emissions, of course, has uh, actually seven, but for industrial purposes, we have six gases. One is carbon, then there's methane, there's nitrous oxide. There are so many more, right? So uh, all these six gases, when measured, there's this GHG protocol, which I'm sure everybody is aware of. When measured, they are changed, or they are accounted for in terms of carbon equivalent. So basically, let's say 1 ton of methane will is like 12 tons of 12 times of that of 1 ton of CO2, giving example, or 64 times. So it will be multiplied by that factor. And we will always have emissions in terms of carbon. And that is why it will be called carbon equivalent emissions. That's why greenhouse gases are also interchangeably called as carbon emissions. So this is like the scientific background, but I know we don't need a lot of scientific uh, knowledge here. So I'll kind of get into scope 1, 2, and 3. I'm sure you all know it. That is scope 1 is any emission that is directly being generated within the boundary of a company, the reporting boundary of a company, and that is under their direct control. Then scope 2 is any uh, emission that is being generated outside the premises of the company. So that's why it's not under their direct control, it's indirect, but still they have a lot of influence on that, because that emission that is happening is directly because of this um, company. So, for example, electricity or purchase heat, purchase steam, many of the companies have in the western side of the world. So, these are when you are purchasing electricity, then the electricity producer is kind of burning coal, let's say, for generating that electricity. That is their scope 1, but the company it is generating that electricity for, it is that company's scope 2. So that is something. And then scope 3 is pure supply chain emissions, where of course there are like so many categories, 12 to 14 categories, starting with purchase goods and services. Then there is upstream logistics and downstream logistics, uh, any emission from there, any emission from waste generated, any emission due to the employee commute each day, any generation from the business travels, all the flights that the company employees are taking for business purposes, any emission from their leased assets or franchisees. All these are coming under the scope 3, right? So that is what is basically our supply chain emissions. Now, to be able to, a company, whenever it starts acting on reducing that scope 3 emission, it is called decarbonization of that supply chain. Any company doing scope 1 and 2 decarbonization is their uh, own decarbonization, whereas anything that is scope 3 is supply chain decarbonization. In a recent study, I think from BCG or somewhere, I read that scope 3 is 24 for a general like company, it's 24 times more than their scope 1 and 2 combined. However, it is subjective because for for a company who is producing vehicles would have more than 90% of their emissions coming from scope 3, whereas an company producing aluminium will have more emissions coming in from their scope 2 category. So it is subjective, but for most of the consumer goods or automotive or any basic materials, it's usually scope 3. Chemical industry, pharmaceutical industry, it's all the scope 3 that plays a major chunk in the journey of decarbonization. So, with that note, let's move on. I think I have already explained this. So, basically, what is scope 1, 2, and 3? And as I was saying, scope 3 can is like the major forming the major chunk of emissions. We will now look at some of the strategies that can help companies reduce their, the strategies that a company can undertake if they want to embark on the journey of decarbonization. Number one, it's renewable energy. So basically, when we are talking about decarbonization cannot happen only for scope 3. I mean, it cannot be kind of separated out from scope 1 and 2, right? So that's why we talk about renewable energy, because renewable energy is something that forms the basic of scope 1 and 2. And once a company starts switching to renewable energy, transitioning to renewable energy from any non-renewable sources, it is easier for them to convince their suppliers that, hey, see, we have embarked on the journey of decarbonization for our own plants and manufacturing facilities. It's time that, I mean, hence we have done our bit, we are pushing you to do it. And that is why renewable energy is a very important transitional tool, I would say. Not tool, but transitional aspect. Now, how can a company achieve renewable energy transition? What are the steps they should need to undertake? So, the ultimate goal should be that they are sourcing renewable energy that is, let's say, energy can be fuels as well as electricity, right? So, talking about electricity first, they can their long term goal should be that we have 100% renewable energy in all our manufacturing units and offices, either by setting up our on site renewable plants or by sourcing off-site, like from off-site, any electricity that is being produced through wind or solar or hydroelectricity, right? So those are renewable sources. So for example, ITC has kind of come up with some of their on-site renewable plants, and they are of course doing a huge work on off-site renewables as well. But that is like, of course, building those plants, having those agreements in place, or doing all the planning. It's like a long term, and it is like it should be phased in like 3-year target, 5-year target. Nobody can say that, okay, getting up in the morning saying that, okay, today now we are starting with 2026, but in 20 by 2027 I'll have all renewable plants from where I'll be sourcing, right? So they need to do it in phased manner. However, during this phase, if they want still whatever energy that they are sourcing from non-renewable sources, they can have a renewables energy certificate for that. So basically, that should only be used as a transitional tool, because RECs, like renewable energy certificates, are quite costly. So that should not be a permanent solution. What happens is, in RECs, what happens is that companies use their own whatever non-renewable electricity they have, but parallelly they also purchase RECs from companies who have produced renewable energy, and they kind of try to balance it out. So there are 100 units of coal based electricity used by a company in a year. They buy 100 units worth of RECs, and they say that we have kind of, since we have paid for that REC, our renewable energy is not is like our energy is all sourced from renewable sources. So that is one way of doing it, but then that is in the long run quite costly. So that should only be used as a transitional tool if suppose companies are failing to kind of uh, reach their targets if they have already set. But ideally, PPAs, even virtual PPAs, and then on-site and off-site renewables are the best solutions that way. Or if they suppose the company has taken a target of 100% renewable by 2027, and in 2027 they could only achieve 80% renewable through the on-site, off-site instruments, then they can go for RECs for the 20% of it, to just to match their target and fulfill the target. So that should be a way of renewable energy sourcing. Then there comes material innovation. So basically material sourcing, right? So whatever raw materials they are sourcing, they need to, so because purchase goods and services form 40 to 70% of a company's scope 3. So even in the scope 3, this category called purchase goods and services have the highest emission because of the materials being used. So how the materials are being used actually impacts a company who is using that material. So for example, again coming back to my favorite car example of BMW, uh, if there's a steel being used in that car, then that steel's product footprint, that is, if the steel has, let's say, a footprint is being sourced from Europe versus India, of course, the India steel would have more emissions than the Europe one. Then the company should, may rethink of where they are sourcing it from. Should they continue with that supplier? And if they continue with that supplier who's from India, let's say, having high grade, like high carbon intensive emissions, whether they can work out with those suppliers, like let's say BMW can work out with Tata Steel or not to produce low carbon steels. I'm giving this example because the answer is yes. Tata Steel has started already working on green steel, and they are working instead of the traditional blast furnaces, they are moving to electric arc furnaces. They are doing a lot of pilots, and now with UK government's help, they have already done like back the project for UK where Tata Steel is developing low carbon steel there. So it's like material innovation can be real and should be done. Then using some recycled and bio-based materials, whether there can be a circular material sourcing chain established. And then all of this, of course, comes from the design planning phase, right? So all of that is material innovation. So I can kind of go on and on material innovation because that is something I have deeply worked on while I was developing one carbon accounting and decarbonization emission pathway tool in the past. And we were exactly seeing how much emission can be reduced. So, what we saw there was, let's say, the same product being used in three different countries or three different regions can have much different environmental impact because the electricity, let's say, is being used has a different grid, right? So each grid has a different mix of the fuels that combine the that are used for producing the green grid electricity. So of course India's grid is becoming greener day by day, and I think we are doing great job there, like we as a country. But let's say Canada's, by geographic, their grid is very much green because they derive this energy from hydropower. So they have a very quite green grid. So I work deeply with in aluminium. So in aluminium, if the Indian India, the per ton of aluminium would have emission of 14 to 15 CO2, like 14 to 15 ton CO2 per ton of aluminium would be the emission factor. Whereas in Canada, it would be 4 ton of CO2, 4 ton of CO2 per ton of aluminium in Canada. So because of the grid, can you see the wide difference? Now a company trying to source low carbon aluminium, for them it will be very obvious choice to go to Canada. But then of course, why are then companies still sourcing aluminium from India? Of course, one of the reasons for aluminium is, I mean, uh, the mass and the scale at which India and China produces, no other country can match that scale. And then, of course, there are logistic challenges also. So, because of all these combinations, now companies who are, let's say, sourcing aluminium from India or China are working out ways to see how to lower the carbon intense of the products. Now, in China, there is one region where the government has kind of tried and relocated most of the plants in that region where it is having high hydroelectricity uh, distribution. So they have different grids there. So that particular grid where there's hydropower electricity, they are trying to relocate all the manufacturing units to that. They, as in the government, is asking companies to relocate to that region so that their products are low carbon intensive and can easily be sold to the Western world. So these are different strategies that companies are undertaking. Then coming to logistics optimization, again, as I was saying, that I mean, even if there is enough aluminium available in Canada, still companies would source from India and China because of certain logistics advantages. So those advantages play a part in logistics optimization and decarbonization. So one is, of course, route and network optimization. Then there is a company, if they kind of shift from from air to rail and sea, it's much more carbon effective and cost effective as well. So companies, unless it's too urgent, would always rely on rail and sea. Then there is fleet electrification. Some companies like Flipkart, we all know, has already transformed to 100% last mile EV for last mile delivery. Zomato is doing that. So Zomato has not completely done it, but they are working with their logistic partners like the delivery folks to work on to kind of influence them to like switch to fleet to switch to electric vehicles and tying them up with some of the EV players. So that is something Zomato is also doing. And then, of course, there is alternative fuel option. So now this last option is quite costly and it is still in pilot phases for most of the countries. So alternative fuel, like instead of, let's say, alternative fuel may, okay, aviation fuel. There's something called SAF, sustainable aviation fuel, but it costs like 15x from the normal fuel that's being used. So it's still in the pilot phase and the research is still going on to kind of bring down the cost of aviation, sustainable aviation fuel. But of course, the world is trying to find out ways of reducing cost of sustainable options. And once that is there, then this would play a major role in logistics decarbonization. And finally, it is now you know what you want to do, suppose through renewable energy, or you want to do material innovation, or you want to do logistics optimization. The last part is how would you do it? You would have to engage with your suppliers to work on these aspects and push them or work out a middle path of getting the like the decarbonization done by your suppliers. I mean, you can think of having material innovation, low carbon steel, but it's like if BMW wants to have that, they have to work it out with Tata Steel or any other suppliers for that matter to get this done. Like even for logistics optimization, Zomato has to work with their logistics partners, which are these delivery partners, right, for them to gain the fleet, I mean, to kind of launch the fleet electrification and scale it up. So this is something that we will look into, both logistics optimization and supplier engagement in the upcoming slides. So just a question for team, do we take a break or can I continue with the session? Or does the
Ma'am, you
yeah.
can continue with the session.
Okay, okay, great.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. So, okay. Now, talking about fleet optimization, I have already touched upon these points, but quickly we'll brush through so that we have some examples also. That is something that I've put on the slides. One is when we say route optimization, we try and reduce the mileage, and there are companies who have done that. So there are like 10 million miles that UPS is saving through once they had done the project on route optimization. Then when I was saying that mode shifting thing, so if you can see that rail and sea is cutting down 90% of transport cost when compared to trucks. So basically, instead of these road trucks, we should like the companies should, of course, it may take it may, I mean, it has a lot of uh, uncertainties when we are sending it through a sea route, but still, and it may take a little more long, like sea or rail route, but they should go through it because it will cut down the emissions by 90%. Then vehicle electrification. So Amazon, you can see, has already ordered, and like it was ordered last year, and now they already have these on road. Amazon, the 1 lakh electric vehicles. Then companies should, so this is not only about logistics, it's also about warehousing. So in the warehouses, there should be, first of all, natural lighting. So natural lighting is, you understand, right? So we make on the rooftops, we have these skylights, as we call it. So transparent sheets put, or glass sheets put, so that there's natural light coming into the warehouses during the daytime, and there's no need of using electricity. And then at all, if we need to use electricity, the electricity should be like, the lighting should be done through LEDs, which saves 70% of energy in facilities. So all these initiatives together can help companies achieve fleet optimization or logistics and warehouse decarbonization. Now, coming to the supplier engagement part, how does a company develop a supply chain decarbonization strategy? So, first and foremost, for the company, what they need to do is they need to first set their best baseline. So that is, they need to, while doing the carbon accounting is an annual process that every company needs to do kind of every year to understand where they stand. That helps in them in setting targets. Those targets may or may not be approved by any international body like SBTI. But I mean, of course, every company should are striving to get SBI certified or SBI approved targets, because that is what is kind of you can say it's just that it's another point of control, that if SBTI has approved your targets, then the path that you're selecting is logical, and then you can frame your initiatives around those targets so that you can achieve those targets in time. Now, even if the company is in a nascent stage and is not yet ready to kind of submit their targets to SBTI, they should still set some internal targets so that the implementation team can still work towards reaching those targets and develop initiatives around it. And then again, this carbon accounting is a annual process, because you also keep monitoring your progress against your targets and compared to your previous year's performance. Now, when I say carbon accounting is, of course, something that you do annually, but there has to be a base year that you select for your comparison and monitoring, right? So for many of the companies, or most of the companies, it is either 2018. Most of the companies is 2018, but for some it's 2017 or 2019 as well. For Indian companies, since they have started taking this, they have embarked on this journey very recently. For some companies, it can also be 2020. But the targets that are being set are now for 2030, 2040, 2050. So 2030 and 2040 can be intermediate targets, but usually the globally companies are trying to achieve net zero by 2050. India, of course, has set like the government has set the target to be 2070 for being net zero as a country. But many of the companies, or most of the companies, are setting their targets for 2050 in India or 2040, not 2040, but 2050, because their customers who are sitting in Europe or US or any of the middle like Western countries already have taken targets for earlier years, and for them to keep supplying to them, they need to kind of maintain the same level or pace. Hence, they have also set their net zero targets for an earlier phase. Now, there is a loophole in setting this target and getting it approved by SBTI. That is, in case a company feels that they are not able to fulfill this target, they can, few years later, they can also submit for a request to revise the targets. So let's say a company who has promised or who has taken a target of becoming 100% renewable by 2030, if by 2027 they see that no, we are not even 80% or 85%, 90% there, and there is no way we can achieve that in the next 2 3 years because of whatever blockages they have. There might be some change in strategy or change in business focus, change in management or management focus. Then they can submit for a revised target, and they can ask SBTI to approve the revised target for, let's say, 2035. So that is also doable. And there are times where, like, because I have worked with some of these Western countries, what happened was there was one particular tire company who had set their net zero target for 2035. Now in 2025, we, like, our team developed a decarbonization strategy for them, decarbonization pathway, what are the exact initiatives and levers they can take, and how much would each of those cost. So basically developed like abatement cost curve. So marginal abatement, through that marginal abatement cost curve, we kind of showed that, hey, if you want to switch to, let's say, low carbon material, so and so material. So we kind of prioritized top 10 materials and said, if which form the 90, which form, let's say, 90% of their sourced materials. If you want to transition to material, this is the cost you will have by 2030. This is the cost you will have by 2040. Then if you want to go for, let's say, hydrogen production, you cannot have it before 2035. It's not feasible. Some of the decarbonization levers were not feasible to kind of deploy by 2030 or 2035 that they were looking at. And if you want to go through the other routes, this will cost you so much. So they realized that they do not have the uh, budget to spend so much on decarbonization strategies, the things that we quoted. So they kind of reanalyzed. They had invited us to build their strategy so that they are able to achieve net zero by 2035. Now, since they could not achieve by the time, like we said, that this is the cost you'll have to shed, and these are the activities you have to undertake if you want to be net zero by 2035, they said, no, we cannot do that. And then we kind of revised it, and then we finally understood that with the budget that they have and the projections that they have, they can reach net zero only by 2045. So then the company initiated a process of revisiting their targets and then submit to SBTI a request to kind of push their push out the net zero date by 10 years or at least 5 years. So like that. So that is something that a decarbonization strategy does. So the first step for that is, of course, as I said, setting a baseline year. And then how how do one do that? So once you have the carbon accounting in place, you analyze which are the key emission categories that are forming most part of your emission, that is 80 90% of the emission. Which categories, first of all, which scope is it coming from? Is it coming from scope 1, 2, or 3? For different industries, it's different. For example, for an energy producer, scope 1 is will be their highest emitting scope, because they are doing the all the energy consumption in house. That is, there will be scope 1. For aluminium industry, it is scope 2, because aluminium production is a very very high electricity intensive process. So most of their emissions come from scope 2. Whereas for any automotive industry or consumer goods or uh, chemicals and pharmaceuticals, it's scope 3 that plays the major role. It's more than 90%. So basically, first you need to identify with scope. Now, if you understand the scope, let's say for most of the industries, it's scope 3, which are the categories that are forming, let's say, 70-80% of your scope 3? Is it the category 1, which is purchase goods and services? Is it your upstream and downstream logistics? Is it your capital goods, which is category 3? Is it your waste generation? So you kind of look at the top 3 or top 5, depending on what the company wants to look at. We have the top 3 or 5 categories, usually at least 5 categories that form most of the emissions. Having identified that, we understand who the suppliers are. Suppliers, as in, of course, for purchase goods and services and capital goods, there will be some suppliers. Like, not capital goods are already done, but still, if there is any, if there are any future plans of capital good development, there is a new manufacturing unit coming up. For that, I'm saying we do the categorization, and then if there's waste from logistics, we list their logistics partners, and then we have a way of doing supplier segmentation by category, depending on how material they are. So how material there are is a, this is carbon materiality. So that is what portion of emission is being contributed per supplier. So in the last step in spot analysis, we saw the top 5 categories, let's say. Now for each category, which are your top 10 suppliers that you are sourcing materials from? Now, top 10 suppliers can be, I mean, how is the emission from each supplier counted? I'll just tell you. It can either be accounted for by spend method, that is, how much you have spent on each of the suppliers. So, top 10 suppliers that you have spent on, you derive the carbon from their carbon emission of those, or you can go by top 10 suppliers by volume of purchase. So from PO orders, you can go by the volume also. So going by the volume is a more accurate way of doing it than going by the spend method, because a dollar value attached is depends on a lot of factors, right? On international conversion rate, on today for a material, today aluminium might cost 10 rupees, tomorrow it may cost 15 rupees. So there is always a discrepancy, but the volume will never change, right? That will remain constant. Whether you have, if you have taken 10 kilos of aluminium in a year, that will remain 10 even after, like in 2025, so and so company had taken 10 kg of steel. It will remain the same in 2035. Whereas the money, if you account for, that will keep, the value of money will keep shifting. However, it's easier for companies because there is a lot of gap in data collection. Of course, you all know how it happens. So there are so many times there are gaps in data collection, and hence companies usually go by the spend method because they have at least the spend data from, for financial audit purposes. So they usually have the spend based carbon materiality assessment done. So once you have identified the top suppliers from there, prioritized suppliers, then uh, we cannot rely on the spend data. So we go for actual emission data collection from the supplier. Now, what does that mean? That means there's a set of questions, survey questions, all prepared for the suppliers. So there's a survey questionnaire, like some, most of them are qualitative and some are quantitative. That is, let's say, what is your, like you were a company asking the supplier, what is your sustainability uh, goal? Have you already set any targets? What are the targets you have set? First of all, have you done any carbon accounting for your own company? Yes or no? Because there can be so many small players, like let's say for a company like ITC. If they are like taking raw material from some small farmers, of course they are not doing carbon accounting for those, or they are taking uh, a company is taking some tractors and all on rent, those tractor companies are not doing their carbon accounting, or logistic partners are not doing. So basically, it's important to ask that question to the suppliers and have that survey in place. And based on the survey that has been collected, there is a scoring mechanism that is there. So there's a framework based on which the when the surveys come in, flow in for the top, again, mind you, it should be the top, uh, whatever the company decides. Like they decided for going for the top 5 emission categories, they may decide to go with the top 50 suppliers. So the questionnaires are kind of given to 50 suppliers only, because of course if there are smaller suppliers down the list, uh, they might not be able to give that data for sure. So data collection is a very manual and used to be a very manual and time intensive process. Once the survey data is collected, that data is evaluated, and based on that evaluation, the suppliers carbon maturity. Earlier, we did materiality assessment for segmentation. Now we are doing carbon maturity assessment to understand the supplier's emission performance. And based on that, whatever the performance is for each supplier that you've kind of, let's say top 20, we have gone with the top 30 or top 50. For the top 50 is a lot. Usually companies go with top 20 or 30 to begin with in the first phase. So again, this is done in a phased manner. So first phase, let's say you do 20 to 30 companies, and what they do is they engage with the suppliers. That is, they have either group discussions or one-on-one discussions, or for a particular material. Let's say a company is sourcing rubber, they can have, if they have 5 rubber suppliers from Thailand, they can have a discussion with all the 5 suppliers from Thailand in one room one day, and decide and prioritize decarbonization levers. What it means is, how much, if the first question would be whether the companies are already doing their decarbonization initiatives, there can be scoring given, and based on the scoring, some suppliers will be, let's say, at advanced level, whereas they are like really matured, they are already on their journey, and if you kind of co-invest with them, you can get great results, like companies are doing with Tata Steel. Tata Steel already has gone into partnership with ABB, with BHP, and they are all co-investing, and they have given a assurance to Tata Steel. What is this partnership means, that if Tata Steel says that by 2027, which they have promised, they'll produce first batch of green steel, and this green steel will have, let's say, 5% or 10% more price than the originally existing steel, then these clients have agreed to buy that grade of steel as per the requirements, specified requirements, for next 10 years. Why? That they have given a minimum bucket of, let's say, we'll be taking 10% of our need or 50% of our steel from you for sure, or given a quantity that, okay, fine, 2,000 tons of steel will come from your plant for sure. This buy-in is required because any supplier, like let's say Tata Steel, is doing huge investment. Like I think 1.2 billion USD investment, or not, 1.2 billion pounds has been invested for this project, let's say. Then of course that level of commitment is required from the customers, that okay, fine, you go ahead with the production. If it's a success, we are there to buy it from you for the next 10 years. So such partnerships happen, but all these actual discussions happen only if you have prioritized your suppliers, right? So I'm sure ABB, HBP, they have done the supplier prioritization. Tata Steel has come up as their one of their very important suppliers, and hence these discussions have happened. So that is something there. Then you identify the levers. Basically, having a green steel is one of the levers, right? So, and how they have the green steel is their lever of the supplier. Now, based on the abatement potential, that is how much of the total scope 3 emission will that particular uh, lever reduce, that is discussed. What's the feasibility? Like, for example, if a company says, okay, from 2027, we'll be using hydrogen. Uh, is that possible? You cannot use 100% hydrogen uh, by 2027 because hydrogen is still in nascent phase, and at least it will be 2030 or 2035 for hydrogen to be very commonly available. And right now, I know of some companies who are producing some like trying to produce hydrogen, but that's only 50 to 60%. That won't be 100% hydrogen. And then, of course, there's associated cost. If somebody wants to do hydrogen by 2027, they might have to shed 3 times more money than they would if they would want to do it by 2030. So that kind of, or 2035. So that kind of judgment calls are taken during these meetings. And finally, with all these discussions in place, a proper strategic plan or a roadmap is created with with very specific goals and targets laid out that all the parties agree with. Now, this we just discussed about all big good players for whom doing these are of course difficult, but a lot of planning, a lot of discussions are involved, but then still it's doable. But there are certain suppliers who are critical for some of the companies, but those suppliers are not doing much in terms of sustainability. Now, what does a company do when your supplier is not doing a lot of things? So it can even begin. So, first, I said that we will categorize the suppliers in buckets of advanced, intermediate, and beginner. So, for advanced, they are already doing things, you have discussions, you go for partnerships, and it's done. For intermediate, you would see that they are doing their carbon accounting. They know they should do decarbonization, but they don't have the capital to do it. So at those in such cases, many a times customers or companies, what they do is they co-invest in the supplier's project, and they say that we are investing, but we will buy the things from you at a lower cost because we are kind of investing in your decarbonization projects based on which your portfolio will be built so that you can pitch to other clients. So that co-investment mechanism also exists. Now, coming to the most preliminary stage of beginners, if a supplier is at a beginner level, that is, they've heard about what sustainability is, but they have not even done their carbon accounting properly, and they are in no position to kind of go ahead with decarbonization. What would happen then? What happens in those cases is that the customers actually have some investment in place to initiate supplier capability sessions. So they hire a consulting firm or they organize sessions to kind of, first of all, educate the supplier team or supplier company to have a proper ESG team in place, to build their capability, to conduct couple of small pilot projects with them, and then test their intentions, whether that supplier is kind of willing to shift to like transition to a sustainability path or not, and how hard it is to push the supplier to do sustainability. If it is very hard, then the last option would be that the client explores ways of kind of switching supplier, so switching to alternative supplier who has more green profile. But usually, since these suppliers are selected with a lot after a lot of scrutiny, and there are so many other aspects playing, sustainability is not the only aspect, right, that plays a role in supplier selection. So the main is that the material they share is like of good quality or of required quality, and the pricing is fine, the supply chain, like the logistics chain, is sorted. So usually companies don't want to kind of switch to an alternate supplier. But if sustainability is the company's priority and it is not at all the supplier's priority, and they are not aligned, then the last option left would be like to switch to any alternate supplier. So I'll give you one example. While doing that decarbonization strategy for a tire company, we saw that one grade of rubber, synthetic rubber, is being sourced from Russia, and which was a very big quantity, and the company had like kind of tried to reach out to that Russian company to uh, go on that path of sustainability, but due to geopolitical reasons, the supplier was for long was not able to kind of embark on the sustainability journey, and kind of was not able to keep pace with the tire company's progress in terms of sustainability. Hence, there were quite a few efforts put in place over a couple of years, but finally, had to advise the tire company to possibly move away from the Russian supplier and switch to one Brazilian, like any supplier from the region of Brazil. The reason being, like, we had nothing to do with the supplier. It was more of like the country specific emissions that I was talking, right? So, first of all, Russia's way of producing tire, the method, there are two, three ways of producing synthetic tires. The method that's popular in Russia is, first of all, very carbon intensive when compared to the ones that are existing in Brazil. The product would be the same grade of product, so there wouldn't be any compromise on the product quality. But again, then there were geopolitical reasons for which they were not able to move away from carbon intensive methods. So we had to kind of advise the client to work on the suggestion of moving to alternate suppliers. So such things do happen, and hence supply chain decarbonization is very important, because supply chain, building a resilient supply chain in today's world, especially like what we have seen throughout COVID and even after COVID, is that having a resilient supply chain is always very important for having continuity in the business, right? So that is something that I had to share with all of you today. Now, I have a few examples from companies who have already embarked on their supply chain decarbonization journey. But before that, I'll just quickly touch upon the point of digital enablement. So, what happens in digital enablement is nothing but all these that we discussed is for a company. You can see, like, for companies who have any retail company, let's say, having 5,000 or 6,000 stores across globe, how are they supposed to manage uh, this kind of data, or the supplier engagement that I was talking about? Companies have thousands of suppliers. Of course, initially they would do it for 20, 30, but eventually they would phase, I mean, they'll scale up to this, they'll in the next phases move to 50 suppliers, 100 suppliers, and then 200 suppliers. And managing data for so many suppliers and conducting these analytics manually is very time intensive, and there are chances of manual errors, and there and visualization also we need good tools. And that is why it is very important for companies nowadays to have proper digital tools in place, and many of the companies are migrating to, or doing a digital transformation to the specified uh, sustainability related platforms or softwares, because having some data in one particular tool, then developing dashboards, you can say dashboards are developed in Power BI also, but then you do one analysis here, then you kind of do the visualization there, and then do so many things in bits and pieces that has like that becomes very difficult for even teams to handle data. That's why there are integrated softwares nowadays. Like, for example, there is Microsoft Sustainability Manager called MSM. There's SAP SFM who do the sustainability footprinting. So for SAP also there is one. Then there are independent softwares like Watershed, Catalyst Zero, then supplier decarbonization suite developed by many of the renowned companies in the world, like Teralytics for carbon product footprint. So, and then we also have by Salesforce and ServiceNow, we have the supplier data management platforms. So I was talking about the supplier survey and the analytics, right? So this can be done on a platform. And for example, my team and myself were involved in developing the supplier data management module for many of the procurement platforms. So these things are really important, the digital enablement. And then last but not the least is the governance part of it. So all of this can be done, but there should be proper guidance and leadership focus on sustainability that should not only guide in terms of technical expertise, but also enable cross-functional uh, interactions, accountability, so that because like sustainability is an aspect where data needs to flow in from different departments. There has to be even when it comes to initiatives, it has to be trickled down through different initiatives. Sustainability team alone cannot kind of do an initiative with the energy team or EHS team without them being involved. So in the manufacturing plants, without the manufacturing team being involved, in the procurement or the supply chain phase, without the procurement teams being involved. So it's the multi-departmental accountability that needs to be there. And governance, like the actual leadership and governance should kind of facilitate all of this. So that's all I and last but not the least, when the company embarks on a journey of sustainability, if decarbonization, if there is a small bit of uh, emission still remaining, which always will be there, because not 100% can be decarbonized for various reasons. There is a resort where carbon offsets can be bought and can be applied, but there is no specific rule on that as of date. Of course, there are these year there is some development happening in the pace of carbon offsetting. So hopefully it will be there. But for now, I think 5 to 10% of it can be offset. But first, the company needs to kind of work on their 90-95% of decarbonization through proper strategies and initiatives. Only then the remainder 5 to 10% can be offset. So with that, we are on time. So there, I'll leave behind these uh, examples, as in I because I want to leave like 10-15 minutes for question answers also. So here are examples from different industries and different uh, countries that we can refer to, with most of them coming from India. So you can see that Amazon has taken a pledge to be net zero by 2040, and they have this uh, goal of having 1 lakh EVs by 2030. Then Apple has Apple's program is like very famous and widespread. That is, they are having supplier clean energy program where they are kind of investing in 17.8 gigawatt of renewable capacity. And then we have Tata Steel. Again, Tata Steel is also very renowned because it's being talked about in the world for doing that, getting into that contract with UK government for having hydrogen ready DRI electric arc furnace. And then we have Mahindra Logistics with 1500 plus EVs. Then we have ITC. ITC is working in the space of climate smart agriculture. And we also have Birla. I have put this Birla example because not many people know about circular textiles that are being developed, like built, manufactured using recycled pulps. So the waste recovery that I was talking about. So they have partnered with a company called Circulose, which used to be a startup few years back, and now they have scaled up really, really fast. And they are trying to design this closed loop of textile production to reduce the usage of virgin materials. So these are great examples. You can Google them and read articles about them. These are widely available. And yeah, thanks for having me. Please feel free to contact me over LinkedIn, or you can directly mail to me at my first name dot last name at gmail.com. And now I would like to open the floor for discussion if you have any questions.
Yes, ma'am, it was very good session. So can you start with the question answers? We have few of them.
Yeah, sure.
So our audience wants to know how CBAM will impact Indian markets. Which country will get the most benefit of CBAM?
Okay. So, how it will impact Indian market is that, of course, there's a huge impact that India may have if they want, will have if they want to keep exporting to Europe, because there is this border adjustment. This is nothing but a border adjustment tax, right? Where, let's say, 1 ton of steel produced in Europe, if the value is 5, I'm just giving vague examples, 5 ton per uh, 5 ton CO2 per ton of steel. But in India, if there is 10 ton of CO2 per ton of steel, then there is a difference of 5 ton of CO2, right? Now, the company who's importing it, so let's say if BMW is taking from India, then BMW has to pay for that 5%, like five a difference of 5 tons, and there'll be cost for per ton of CO2 set by the government. Now, that will have be multiplied with the volume that is being imported. And if the tax is so high, then of course it will be the supplier who has to pay for that, because of course the companies will be like, I better than buy from, I mean, I'm buying from India for a lot of reasons, cost being one of them. So why don't I switch to somebody in Europe? So it is India who has to strive to lower the uh, emission per ton of steel that is going to Europe. Now, there is a twist here. I mean, something that the companies can do or are doing, planning to do, is having separate facilities for European customers. So, what will happen is they'll make those facilities very less carbon intensive, so that, I mean, not everybody who is buying from Tata Steel requires that good grade steel, right? So they can have specific grades of steel being produced, which are, or specific batches which are low in carbon, so that the cost, I mean, so that they don't have to kind of decarbonize all the steel plants at once. So that is what they're doing. They're doing it in phased manner, where only a few plants or few production processes are being focused on for decarbonization, so that they can play a role um, so that they can kind of have lower carbon per ton of production and can be shipped to Europe. Of course, through agreements of, again, the buying agreements that I was saying, right? That if they are doing it, they might just ask BMW that, see, I'm doing this entire new process for you. I'll be charging you 2 or 5% premium. They would Usually they would agree, because otherwise they would have to pay a lot of more high tax. And they would say that we need another buy-in from you, that you have to promise that you'll keep buying from us for the next 5 years at least, so that we kind of reach a break-even point. So those partnerships will be playing an important role here for CBAM. And countries that will be mostly affected are countries that have very carbon intensive productions, mostly the Asian countries do not have a lot of decarbonized processes. So and if their grids are not green enough, so their emission per ton of carbon will be much higher, and they all will face the issue.
Yes. Well answered. I would move on to the next question. What is the average value of carbon intensity for steel production in India?
Yeah. So a carbon intensity for steel, I'll have to Google it, but it was somewhere around 2.3 or 2.5. Or no, that is for Europe. Let me just check.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll check and I'll
Yeah,
get
yes,
back.
yes,
Yeah.
we'll definitely move on to next. Who is the regulator in India for setting up the emission factors?
Okay, so for emission factors, we don't have a specific body in India. For electricity, we have it's CEA.
Okay.
uh, CEA does for electricity, but for any ingredients that we are talking about, emission factor is not something that is being set up
Yeah.
because emission factor. So I'll just give a basic example of emission factor. So emission factor is nothing but emission produced per ton of production. So in India, it will play a, I mean, of course, grids play a role. So grids have their emission factor. So CEA is the one that sets the emission factor for grid. But apart from that, there is no specific guideline. So we refer usually to, for steel, we refer to World Steel Association. Then for others,
Yes.
there's UK DEFRA, there is US UPA, and then there are these databases that are giving out country-specific emission factors. For
Okay.
India also, I mean, for example, this steel in India, if somebody asks, so one can go into a database called EcoInvent that gives out. Then there is CEDA in emission factor, CEDA. So these are different databases where these emission factors are maintained, and they are, of course, they cost. They are not free of cost. They have so companies have licenses. So of course, a company takes license from only one of them. So US EPA and UK DEFRA are free of cost. And the rest of the databases that I mentioned who have country-specific emission factors are all paid. But then a good point, you can go into GHG protocol. They also have some of these free sources, but those will be global averages only. They'll not be very country
Right.
specific ones. And yes, in India, I was correct. It's somewhere around 2.2 to 2.5.
Okay. Yes. So, which are the sectors where CBAM will be applicable?
Yeah, so sectors where CBAM will be applicable are some of the carbon intensive sectors. So sectors in CBAM would be like something like steel. There are 7 sectors actually.
Okay.
Steel, then cement, then fertilizers, then there is iron and steel, I said. Automotive would come under those only. Then electricity being one. So yeah, there are like 6, 7 sectors. You can Google it. So mainly that's what cement, steel, aluminium, hydrogen, electricity. So these sectors, yeah. Iron,
Yes.
fertilizers, yeah.
Perfect. Yes. Water vapor is also a greenhouse
Right,
gas.
right. Yes, it is a greenhouse gas. Uh, like when we go by the scientific definition of greenhouse gases, there are 7 of them, including water vapor. But when we do this carbon accounting, we do 6. The reason being, water does not stay. So the carbon intensity that we always look at is for a long term, right? But water changes its state very fast. So, I
Correct.
mean, in minutes, it can change. So that is why, I mean, this water is not considered for carbon accounting purposes. However, it definitely has a lot of heat potential for which it is like scientifically, like it will release heat when the water state changes. But when we talk about carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, they stay uh, in the environment for decades and hundreds of decades. So that's why they are accounted for as greenhouse gases because they'll have
Correct.
long-term impact.
Okay. What are the challenges to carry out carbon accounting for supply chain and how to overcome them?
Yes, supply chain challenges, of course. I think I have discussed some of the challenges during the session itself. Number one, suppliers don't have data available. So that is the biggest challenge, right? That because and why they don't have data available is the second challenge. That is, number one, it's not the supplier's priority. If they are small scale suppliers, then of course they cannot even afford to think of sustainable, like setting up a sustainability agenda, because that has a lot of cost attached to it. Even if it's a moderate supplier, they wouldn't focus on sustainability again unless there's a push from the customers. And even if they want to do sustainability, most of the people, at least in India, have there's a gap in terms of knowledge on how to do things. And for every big and small thing, I mean, now of course we are having chat gpt, thanks to that, but for every small and big query you cannot run to consultants because they come with a lot of attached fees. So for all these reasons, and then so basically lack of sustainability focus of suppliers, and that is why there's no data in place. Data management is very scattered. So data management is something that is there. Then there is this uh, vast availability of, like, so there are so many stores and so many plants. How to just streamline data processing is lacking, and hence these digital solutions are really playing as a handy tool for people to use, because you don't need to have a lot of sustainability knowledge if you have the tools in place. So basically what I'm trying to say is these tools are being developed by sustainability experts for layman to use. Basically, you and I don't need to have coding knowledge to use PPT. Similarly, I mean, we need to develop such tools for sustainability also, where people can go in, put data and see the output instead of understanding how the process is happening. If there's a small team who's understanding that, it's very good. But even if there are layman, so not everybody had sustainability expertise, right? So that was a lack, that was a challenge. And so these digital solutions, capability building, changing supplier focus, so these are some of the solutions, I would say.
Right. So we'll move on to next question. What methodology to be adopted to ensure that supply chain is taking initiatives to carry out decarbonization?
Initiative, like methods to ensure
Methods
methods,
to
right?
ensure the supply chain is taking initiatives to carry out decarbonization.
Right. So the first and foremost is supplier engagement. That is, a customer needs to, I mean, not only engagement, but even before that, supplier awareness. So basically, a customer needs to keep hammering the supplier with this fact that, listen, I am conscious about sustainability. If you want to keep supplying to me, if you want to retain me as your customer, you need to have sustainability in your agenda. Then have this, first of all, awareness and clear communication. Secondly, it's not only that it's a one way communication, it's two way. So have proper engagement sessions and discussions with them, and see where what is their opinion. Have they already started doing it? Are they already on the journey? And if yes, or they have thought about it, what are the challenges they are facing? And try and work out with the suppliers to find a middle path. That is, these partnerships that you do, or you maybe you conduct some, you kind of spend a little on some knowledge development sessions. You explain your requirements very clearly, have a streamlined engagement process. So basically, it is not a one time engagement that I'm talking about. It's like a continuous, at intervals you keep having these sessions with them. Keep checking the tracking the progress, and have these discussions, have some brainstorming sessions. I think that is important.
Right. Yes. What are the present timelines as per SEBI for assurance audits for supply chain?
Okay, good question. I am away from audits for since a long time, since last 4 years that I've left EY. I have not got into audits, but yeah, so there is so there it's in phased manner. So whatever I've
Okay.
heard, I'll tell. One
Yes.
starts with so for top 500 starts in 2027, then for 1000 it starts in 2028. So these are the timelines that SEBI is looking at for the BRSR certifications, which include supply chain sustainability module. And there are regulations around who can do the audit, and that the process has become much more stringent. But
Right.
yeah, I don't have very knowledge in too deep in this.
Okay. No worries, Raffi. So, how to avoid double accounting in calculating scope 3 emissions?
Okay, good, really good question. So double accounting is kind of a term that has, I mean, it can basically, it's depends on how you analyze the like you first measure it, right? So for different categories, the methodologies are different. It's just that you have to first of all make sure that there's consistency in measurement. That is number one. I mean, this is, to be honest, a very broad question. If you have asked me about any specific category, I could give an example. But let's say I'll pick up an example myself. Let's say logistics. If we are having a distance-based method of having doing the accounting for logistics emissions, that is, we take even under distance-based, there can be a lot of ways. So distance-based is the truck we know is starting from this point going to this point. Either we give the pin codes and have the distance calculated automatically by, like, through Google Maps or something, or we give the specific uh, emission, kilometers, like 10 kilometers, 12 kilometers, like that. This is not about truck, but it's especially when we're talking about sea routes and rails. Either we give the destination to destination and there are tools and maps in the background that play a role in deciding for that, or we ourselves give the kilometers. We cannot do something like for 10 line items, or for 10 line items we give the distance ourselves, and for some we let the maps do the assumption. So there should we should avoid doing a mix of assumption and this. And if the assumptions are there, they should not exceed more than 5% or 10%. So these are like the general accounting rules that we follow.
Okay. What standard factors are to be referred to calculate scope 3 emissions?
Yes, so GHG protocol is the is does have a has a standard separate PDF. It's available online free of cost. GHG
Okay.
protocol can be used for carbon accounting of scope 3.
Okay.
And for emission factors, GHG protocol itself gives some free sources for each category. It lists, like I said, DEFRA or EPA or any other. So we should pick up the sources from there also for emission factors.
Okay. How do you engage suppliers without turning decarbonization into a compliance burden?
Uh, Good question. I really like it. So basically, it should be a shared responsibility. Like I said, that of course, if we kind of keep only one-way communication of you need to do this if you want to retain us, this is our goal, this is that. So that will become a burden for the supplier. So instead, gauging so that supplier maturity assessment and the supplier scaling is the key step of understanding how mature the supplier is and the method of selecting how to engage with the supplier. Basically, whether you need to go through a discussion, you need to build their capability, or you need to kind of only sit and watch what they're doing, because you know they are doing a lot of things and they'll be on track, and that will align with your goals automatically. So what is should be your action based on the supplier's maturity is something you need to decide, so that you don't put a lot of pressure on a small scale supplier who does not have sustainability as a priority as of now, and who cannot afford to have sustainability as their priority. So we have to be very practical in the approaches, and it has to be very specific for the specific supplier we are trying to engage with. It cannot be a general one size fits all approach for all suppliers.
Right, ma'am. How should organizations prioritize scope 3 categories when starting this journey?
Scope 3 categories, again, by materiality. That is, I think that is exactly what I mentioned in the
Yes, yeah.
session. That is, we need to first see the hotspot analysis. That is, which are the top 3 or 5 categories from which the emissions are coming the most. So you will see that 80% or 90% of emissions are being covered by top 3 or 4 categories. Prioritize that. Work on having decarbonization of that, and the rest will be kind of either act as a domino effect, or it will have you can address it later, or it's okay even if you don't, because you remember you have that 5% of offsets that you can buy even if you. So you need to do that cost analysis whether decarbonization efforts will be more costly or buying offsets would be. So that can be
Correct.
the option.
Correct. So, what role do procurement and sourcing teams play in driving decarbonization outcomes?
they play a very, very critical role because they are the face of the company whom the suppliers know. So basically, suddenly a sustainability team person standing up and is trying to communicate will not help, because they are the main people whom the suppliers would talk to, and they actually know. So most of the information that the sustainability team would try to fetch for the suppliers of the suppliers could already lie with the procurement team. So they need to facilitate any sort of supplier engagements that happen, any supplier survey that happens in communication. So they should be a team that should never be kind of dodged, I would say, while planning for sustainability. And they also have certain priorities in place. So basically, we cannot only run with the sustainability agenda without keeping into account the actual procurement requirements, why a supplier is selected. So if you remember, I mentioned that sustainability cannot ever be the only criteria, right? So there is this cost factor, there's this feasibility factor, there's this material availability factor, inventory factor, for which a supplier is there and has been onboarded by the procurement team. So depending on how critical that supplier is, you need to understand from the supplier procurement team and work out ways of achieving sustainability with the particular supplier.
Right, ma'am. Now, what role does supplier consolidation or localization play in decarbonization?
Supplier consolidation or supplier localization is one of the main drivers of decarbonization, I would say, because a lot of your there are two, three, it's a two-folded answer I would give. Number one, first and foremost, all laws applicable to you will be applicable to your supplier. So, so basically, you don't have to kind of take that extra effort of explaining the laws to them, to kind of tell them ki boss ye karo wo karo, because so basically today if Tata Steel supplies to Mahindra, it's much easier than supplying to, I mean, for Mahindra it's much easier than it's for BMW, right? Because Tata Steel already understands pura India ka
Right.
regulations very well. So that is one thing. Then the second thing is that the logistics related emissions get reduced drastically if it is local, because the distance that you have to transport the material for gets much reduced.
Yes.
And we just saw that rail or ship is
Yes,
much
right.
more effective than truck, right? So I mean, I'm just thinking it loud. India, I mean, because it's a very advantageous, has a very advantageous location. So having something shipped from, let's say, Jharkhand to not Jharkhand, let's say, yeah, maybe from Gujarat to Chennai, if we want to ship something, it's better to go by the sea route than the truck route. So you can have that reduced emission. So all these things can be kind of worked out if you have a local thing. Like for example, nowadays Middle East is focusing a lot on local content. So they have so many perks, and now the government has done that, of course. Like there are so many perks that if you are engaging with your local suppliers, and they are like fully focused on local supply chain. So because it's really helpful in terms of decarbonization.
Right. How should decarbonization goals be embedded in procurement policies and contracts?
Yes. So number one, what the first step is, of course, through the supplier selection process. So there should be sustainability criteria
Right.
now, and the criteria when it's put up, it should not be a checkbox exercise, unlike what has been happening in India for the past like a decade. I would say that it's mostly a checkbox exercise, and there's some external consultant hired who is like told ki जाके देख के आओ हमारे supplier का size. It should not be that. It should be a really, really intensive proper process of having checks on the supplier. That is one. Then in the contracts, there should be sustainability linked incentives. That is, let's say, I mean, if you kind of follow these sustainability goals, or if you have these embedded, then the contract instead of 3 years will be renewed in 4 years. I'm just giving example. So such clause should be added, and there should be more incentives linked to sustainability practices for suppliers, so that they are also motivated enough to kind of perform well in terms of sustainability.
Right. So I would like to have one last question. What common mistakes do organizations make in reporting supply chain decarbonization process? Progress, sorry.
Mistakes they
Common
make. Mistakes.
common mistakes do organizations make in reporting supply chain decarb progress?
Um, Progress in reporting. Okay.
Yes.
Reporting progress में what they I mean not really mistakes, it's everybody's take on that, but what many of the firms try and do is uh, keep highlighting on scope 1 and 2 and ignore the scope 3 decarbonization part. It's not only, I mean, there's no mistake in reporting as such, this is a mistake in strategy, I would say. So basically, of course, you keep doing your scope 1 and 2 maybe, but then you also start thinking about scope 3 from the initial phases, because understand scope 1 and 2 will take, let's say, 5 years, and scope 3 would take 10 years, but your 10 years cannot start after that 5 years. It should start from now, so that you kind of keep having it in a phase manner and you report that correctly as well. That, you know, what they do is they kind of tend to shy away from being transparent from the math, unless it's like regulatory requirement to disclose that. So that should not be the phase. Whatever is the truth. I think there was one time I had read Vedanta's report where they had increased the emission and they had reported it very correctly and with a justification. So I think that is required, that hey, see, this is the increase we are having, and I mean, we have kind of analyzed about it. We are on our way to decarbonize. Even if it's increasing in a year, we will try and kind of catch it, bring it down, and this so and so is the reason. So actually, being transparent in reporting is something that is required, which companies get scared of and then shy away from reporting, even if there is any increase or misalignment with their set targets.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Actually, there were quite few questions. You answered it well, all very patiently. Thank you for that. And now I would like to move on formal vote of thanks. So, on behalf of Sustainability Reporting Standards Board of ICAI, I extend my sincere gratitude to all participants joining today. Very insightful session on supply chain decarbonization. Your presence and active participation contributed significantly to the success of the webinar. I would like to express our special appreciation to distinguished speaker, Ms. Ashwina Ghoshal, for delivering a highly engaging, informative presentations, her valuable insights into supply chain decarbonization strategies, practical approaches to emission reduction, role of organizations in driving low carb supply chains were extremely beneficial and well appreciated by the participants. The session effectively highlighted the growing importance of addressing emission across the value chains, adopting sustainable practices to support climate action, long term business resilience. Ms. Goshal's clear articulation and practical examples have helped all our participants gain a deeper understanding on. So, thank you, ma'am. It was very great to have you. We also extend our heartfelt thanks to all the participants for the keen interest you have shown for the webinar. Your participation reflects a strong commitment towards sustainability and responsible business practices. So we look forward to your continued association and to welcome you at our future programs on sustainability, ESG, and emerging developments in this domain. Thank you once again for your valuable time and participation. Really, ma'am, great, explained, well explained with all the practical examples. Thank you. Privileged to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you. See you again. Bye bye.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you.
Tech support. Go offline.